Unity of Houston is an inclusive church where we seek to understand and live the teachings of Jesus and other spiritual masters. At Unity, we welcome all people from all spiritual paths and every walk of life. We celebrate the diversity of our city and of our world, and we teach love, tolerance, and oneness, seeking to live in harmony with open minds and open hearts.
Wherever you are in your spiritual path, you are always welcome at Unity. Join us and discover that the life of your dreams is already within you. Celebra la vida. Celebrate life. Oh my goodness. I am a person who is just thrilled by diverse expressions of spirit. I am, and I love being in Houston. It's, one of the most, if not the most diverse city in the nation. And the Spanish-speaking cultures that are represented in our city, of course, our neighbor Mexico just south of us, and then all through Central America and South America, and even people from Europe who are Spanish speakers. We're so happy to celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month here this today, and a little bit more. We're going to tell you more about that in a couple of weeks. We have another little touch on this wonderful celebration. So to all of our Spanish members and friends, happy Hispanic Heritage Month. Friday night was the beginning of the Jewish High Holy Days, Rosh Hashanah. In that tradition, they count the beginning of the day of the holiday on the evening, at sunset the previous evening. And so on Friday evening, it began, Rosh Hashanah, and we lost a great soul. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg made her transition on Friday evening. And it was interesting to read that there is a tradition, an understanding that when a soul dies, leaves this earthly plane on the Sabbath, they're considered to be a tzaddik, which is a righteous soul. And when that person dies on Rosh Hashanah, they're considered to be a blessed, righteous soul. And when they leave on Shabbat, on Sabbath, on Rosh Hashanah, it's a great soul. So she stood for inclusion, particularly for women and minorities, and so we honor her and celebrate so many of the things that she stood for. And this church we are committed to inclusion, not because of any political stance or ideology, because it is based upon our principles, that we see God everywhere, in everyone. And so we call it forth, and we call ourselves to awareness of it. Today I've chosen for the title, The Face of God, which is kind of interesting. Like, what color eyes does God have, right? The face of God. It's a metaphor. It's a symbol. How do we put a face on the infinite expression of life itself, on the infinite creation, on the infinite energy of life? Well, there's one right there, and there's another right there, and there's one, and there's one, and there's one. That we are expressions of God, and so each of us is a face of God. But we forget, do we not? And we often forget when we're looking out across humanity. We can maybe even say, well, wait, I know that I'm the face of God, but I'm not so sure about those people over there. And I think this is natural in human evolution, that there was a time that we needed to have a safe group around us, the family, the clan, the tribe. And as we've evolved, we've learned to expand that circle of okayness. I have one of my first teachers in New Thought, Reverend Claudia Franklin. She talked about when she began this spiritual study and this spiritual path in the New Thought tradition, she said her life was kind of a wreck. Her daughter was kind of doing crazy stuff with addiction and relationship, and work was all kind of, and she said the only things that were in my circle of okayness were my dog and my African violet. That was it. Nothing else in the world made sense, or she could bring into the circle of good, the circle of God. But through her journey of healing, that circle expanded and expanded. And all of us are seeking to expand that. I remember as a kid, I grew up in a very homogeneous culture in a little white town in Oklahoma, and we were all Christian, and we all, even though you were one of three flavors. You were either Pentecostal, Baptist, or Methodist, but pretty much the same. We judged everybody. No, I'm just kidding. But I remember as a kid going to another friend's house for dinner, and the cooking smells weren't right. It was the same food, but it was just something, it was different. It wasn't my mama's cooking. And I remember looking back on that, the first time I had Chinese food, it tasted interesting and then weird. You know, it's like, I think there's something, and I don't think I was taught that. I mean, I was in a very kind of limited culture, but there was something in me that was a little suspicious of the new, of the different. Well, somewhere that flip got switched. I mean, the other way, that switch got flipped in me, that I began to love the new and the different in food particularly. And Houston is a great place to be if you like to experience the culinary gifts of all the cultures in our world. My goodness, we'll get back to those restaurants soon. But I believe that this is the journey for each of us who have embraced the unity philosophy. It's to continue to expand our awareness of God in humanity. And not just in humanity, God in everything. And so this really brings me to the idea of spiritual evolution. Reverend Ellen Davenport is a longtime friend. We were living in Dallas at the same time years ago, and that's where we met and did some work together. And now she runs the publishing division back at Unity World headquarters. And she wrote a book called The Five Principles. And she said this: "If I had one wish for the world, it would be that every adult re-examine his or her view of God at least once per decade. God may not change, but people do. And we outgrow our old concepts. The ideas about God that we held at 6 will not serve us at 16, and certainly not at 60. Just as children may outgrow peanut butter and opt for spicy curries, there's more food for you, we can assimilate more and different ideas about the universe and its workings as we evolve." And I know that there's a little discomfort at the edge of that growth for us sometimes, that I can't quite extend my awareness of God's presence as that person or that group. This morning I was reading Mark Nepo in his wonderful daily devotion guide, the Book of Awakening. He says this: "In truth, unconditional love does not require a passive acceptance of whatever happens in the name of love. Rather, in the real spaces of our daily relationships, it means maintaining a commitment that no condition will keep us from bringing all of who we are to each other, honestly. For example, on any given day, I might be preoccupied with my own needs, and I might overlook or bruise what you need and hurt you. But then you will tell me and show me your hurt, and I will feel bad, and you accept that sometimes I go blind to those around me, but we look deeply on each other. You may accept my flaws, but not my behavior, and I am grateful for the chance to work on myself. Somehow it brings us all closer." I have a friend who also grew up in the evangelical tradition, but has kind of, she's doing different things now and is not really part of a spiritual community. And early in the shutdown, she watched a few services here online, and she said, "Well, it just seems like in Unity it's all okay, like everything is good." And I get that if you're used to a dualistic religion where you need to know who's in and who's out, what behaviors are in, what behaviors are out, it can feel like that. We're just here painting this like little brush of, oh, it's all good, it's all God. It can feel like that, but that's actually not what we're about. We're not saying that all behavior is acceptable, as Mark Nepo wrote, but we are committed to bringing ourselves honestly to what is happening and speak what our experience is, and we are committed to seeing the truth of love beneath that behavior. This is not an easy thing, being that love everybody church, and particularly when our culture is so divided and divisive, and we're being told who's in and who's out, who's good and who's bad. So I want to bring it back to the theological underpinnings of our teaching today. And I want to talk about the three faces of God. I have to haul this out of the closet at least twice a year. I think it's a beautiful frame for us to understand who and what God is. And these are, you might link them to the parts of speech: first person, second person, third person. We'll start with third. That's the impersonal, the it. And what we mean by this is that one face of God is that God is everything. Everything is God. That God is the totality of all being, both creation and creator and creative process. There is nothing that is not God. The second face of God is the thou relationship. It's you. It's the it, then the you, or the thou. And this is the relational aspect of the divine. Like there is someone, something there that I can connect with, I can love, I can be loved by, I can worship, I can be protected by. It's an important lens, an important perspective on the divine. And in unity, we embrace that as well. But the third is, it's actually the first, I went in reverse order, is the I. That I am an expression of the divine. Ken Wilber, who is the philosopher who created this model, he says that all of the Earth's great traditions will favor one or two of these perspectives. In the Eastern religions, it's often the first and the third, that everything is God, and therefore, as I'm a part of this cosmos, I am a part of God. All is divine, I am divine. In the Western religions, it tends to focus on that second face of God, that there is a presence, a being, a God that we can know and love, and we can sing beautiful songs to God. And it's all right. It's all part of it. And what we want to seek to do is embody all of those aspects. And at different times when I've given talks on this, I've emphasized different pieces of it. But today it feels really important to talk about that first person, acknowledging our own divinity. And here's why. Well, I want to read a little bit more. I've got a lot of readings today, forgive me. We have 5 basic principles in unity. They are worded in various ways, but the second principle is about humanity and our role to divinity. Since humans are made in the image of God, they have a spark of divinity within them and therefore are inherently good also. Another way of stating this principle, our essence is of God, therefore we are inherently good. This God essence was fully expressed in Jesus the Christ. And there's one more way to state this principle. We are spiritual beings created in God's image. The Spirit of God lives within each person, therefore all people are inherently good. In Matthew chapter 25, Jesus tells a story. It's a very odd story. A lot of his parables were very agrarian, very earth-based, and this one is kind of different. He said on the last day, there will be a day of judgment, and all the people who have ever lived will be gathered before God on the throne of judgment. And they will be divided into the goats on God's left hand and the sheep on God's right hand. And the dividing point is this. Jesus says, when I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was in prison, did you visit me? When I was thirsty, did you give me something to drink? And if you can answer, Lord, when did we ever see you hungry or thirsty or in prison? And Jesus says, whatsoever you do to the least of these, my brothers, you do to me. And then kind of the same thing on the people on the left. I'm not going to go there today. I was brought up in a dualistic tradition that only saw God as outside and that this life here is separate from God, but you can kind of get to God if you say the right prayer and live the right way. And then after this, then you'll go to be with God in the afterlife. But I believe Jesus of Nazareth was a non-dual teacher, and I believe this is metaphor for us to understand separation from God is not real, but we separate ourselves from God. And one of the ways, as a matter of fact, the only time that Jesus ever tells a story about what's going to happen when you die and at the end and who's going to go to the good place and who's going to go in the presence of God and who's not, it's this. It's how you treat your brothers and sisters. It's not about the prayer you said. It's not about which church you go to or what you say you believe. None of that. It's how do you treat people? And do you see God in the least of these? And the reason I think we don't always do that is because we don't see God in the least of these. That our disfavor, our exclusion of other people, other cultures, all of that out in the world is because there is some part of ourselves that is not fully integrated into who we are as the face of God. John shared with me a beautiful quote from A Course in Miracles, which I'd like to share with you too. So lots of quotes today. When you meet anyone, remember it's a holy encounter. As you see him, you will see yourself. As you treat him, you will treat yourself. As you think of him, you will think of yourself. Never forget this, for in him you will find yourself or lose yourself. Whenever two sons of God meet, they are given another chance at salvation. Do not leave anything without giving salvation to him and receiving it for yourself, for I am always there with you in remembrance of you. The presence of the divine is always here with us. The presence of the divine always remembers who we are. And our invitation is in every relationship, and most importantly, the relationship within ourselves, to remember the presence of God in me, as me. I love stories. I don't know if you like stories. I love teaching with stories, and I love being taught by stories. Jesus was a brilliant storyteller, and he would captivate the multitudes with these simple stories that had deep spiritual meaning. We call them parables. And I teach from Jesus' parables a lot, and there are other stories I've used from the other Christian scriptures, from other sacred texts, from the world. But only a couple of times has a story come through me that I guess I'll say I wrote it, or I don't know if I channeled it, because I did a lot of edits. But about a month ago, I was thinking about the talk I was going to give today, and is there a story that will invite us into a deeper understanding and experience of our divinity? And so this is the story of Daniel. Daniel was a lot like you and me. He was doing his best to live a good life and to be a good person, and he found himself in a particularly difficult year. A painful end to a painful relationship. His career was going nowhere and brought him no satisfaction. His friends seemed unconcerned and distant. And then the world was just diving deeper into crisis and turmoil. And he was hopeless and in despair. And at the worst of this hopelessness and despair, a crazy idea came to his head. He remembered that outside the town where he lived, there was a little community, a spiritual community where people lived together. And he didn't know much about it, except that those people were nice. Every time that he talked to them or met them, that they seemed to be peaceful, and they had a quiet happiness about them. And he also noticed they didn't try to proselytize. They never tried to convert anybody to their way of thinking. He didn't even know what their way of belief was, but there was something about the peace and the quiet happiness of those people that drew him. So he made his way to that little community. And as he was sort of wandering around the grounds, a woman came up to him with a basket of bread, and she said, "Hi, can I help you?" And he said, "Well, I'm having a really hard time in my life, and I'm interested in knowing more about how you live." And she said, "Well, that's wonderful. If you just want to go sit on that bench under the oak tree in the courtyard, I'll have one of our helpers come and have a conversation with you." And Daniel was in such pain that he didn't even notice the tree, this gorgeous, gorgeous tree like the live oaks we have here in Houston, a canopy that just covered the whole courtyard. And he sat on that bench under the shade of this beautiful ancient tree, and he noticed that while he was waiting, just sitting under that tree, a little less anxious, a little less sad. And then a man came up to him, kind of a chubby, balding, middle-aged man, and he said, "Hi, I'm Anthony. I understand you want to know more about who we are." Well, he said, "If I want to know more about you." And so he said, "My name is Daniel." He said, "Tell me about your life, Daniel." And without even really knowing why, Daniel just completely unburdened himself, told all of his pain and his sadness and his fear. And the whole time, Anthony just listened with one of those real compassionate expressions. You can tell when somebody is really listening to you, not judging. occasionally smiling, occasionally frowning. And at the end of Daniel's story, Anthony said, well, you are most welcome to stay with us. We don't have a lot of rules, but we do have 3 things that we ask everyone who wants to be a part of our community, even if it's just for a day, to do these 3 things. And that is to serve. We believe in service. So we self-sustain in our community, and we also try to do enough to serve the world around us. So there's work to be done in service. And then the second is stillness. We practice stillness. And we don't care how you do it, but we ask you to do that. You can sit with us together in meditation in the chapel. You can take a walk in the paths on our woods. You can stay in your room. But we just ask every day that you spend time in the stillness. And the third is we ask that you sing. Every morning and every evening we gather to sing simple songs, and there's something about it that heals our hearts, and we would ask that you do those 3 things. And Daniel said, I think I can do that. So Anthony took him into one of the dormitories and showed him a beautiful, tiny room, but it was clean, and there was just a feeling of beauty about it in its simplicity that he couldn't quite explain. And he said, you just rest here, and someone will be by to explain how it all works and where you go for food and how you determine where you're going to do your service. And he said, and Daniel at that point said, well, what do you guys teach? Tell me. Do I need to believe something? And Anthony said, well, we're not that kind of an order. We don't really teach in that way. These are really the only 3 things that we ask. But if you're interested, we have a library with a lot of sacred books from all the traditions, and you are most welcome to study there. But we don't really do that. But once a month, you're invited into the presence of the wise elder, if you choose, and you get to ask one question, and she will answer to the best of her ability. I said, okay. And so he settled into the rhythm of the community. And one of the things they did was that they tried to channel people into the place where they were gifted. And so Daniel had always loved food. He was kin to me. And he liked to cook and bake. And so he was directed into the kitchen. And he got to bring his own skills. And they taught him what they do and how they cook and clean for the community and how they sell some of the things they make out in the world and help other organizations and people. And he just was enjoying it. The singing, he's not a great singer, but he was enjoying that too. The stillness was a problem. His mind was just intruding the whole time. And so he asked Anthony about that. He said, it's okay. You just do it the best you can. Just be quiet. Walk or sit just the best you can. And he got into it. And then after a month, Anthony found him again and said, would you like to come meet the wise elder and ask a question? And well, one thing that Daniel had noticed, that in a lot of the chants, the songs that they sang, those simple pieces of music, and in the conversations, he would hear people talk about the one. And he had some curiosity about that because they weren't teaching him what that was. So he said, yeah, I'd like to ask a question to the wise elder. So Anthony took him to this small cottage that he hadn't noticed before and took him inside. And there was a lovely old woman, small, but somehow there's a strength about her. And she was sitting on a meditation cushion there on the floor. And Anthony introduced them, and then he left. And Daniel sat on the cushion opposite this old woman who had just the wrinkly face and the shiningest eyes. And she said, welcome, Daniel. I understand you have a question for me. And he was embarrassed. He didn't want to say anything dumb or not. He didn't want to be one of those people that didn't know the answer he should know. But he said, well, yeah. Who is the one? And she paused and she smiled and she said, Daniel, you are the one. And something happened. He remembered every cruel word he had ever spoken and every unkind thing he'd ever done. He remembered all of his shameful past, and all of the pain came rushing into his heart and his mind. And her words felt almost like a physical blow to him. Because every evidence, he didn't know what the one was. He had a sense it was like some healing presence, like a Messiah or a Bodhisattva. And he knew he wasn't that, and here's all this evidence. And tears sprang to his eyes, and he was filled with shame, and he ran from her cottage back to his room. He was ready to go back to his painful life because he was so distraught by this experience. He thought that she was mocking him. But he stayed there and cried a long time in his room that afternoon, and Then he got hungry, and so he went to the kitchen, and it was quiet. He didn't say anything, and people were used to that, so they just let him be. And then after dinner, he went in to clean. It was his night to do that, and again, he was just quiet, and they let him be. The next morning, he decided he would stay. He would just avoid the wise elder. And so he, back into the rhythm of the service and the singing and the stillness. And it got better. Day by day, he felt better. He felt less shame, less pain, less anxiety, less fear, less sadness. And he didn't feel the need to go back to the wise elder's cottage the next month or the next month or the next month. But eventually, his curiosity about the one got the better of him. And so one month, he did go back. And he sat on the cushion, and she said, "Welcome, Daniel. What's your question?" And he said, "Who is the one?" And he was already breaking in tears. He didn't want to be told the same thing because he knew that he couldn't be the one. And she was silent for a moment, and she said, "Daniel, you are the one." And he looked down at his hands, trying so hard to not let the tears out. And he couldn't face her, but he didn't want to run away again, so he stayed. He forced himself to sit there, and finally he forced himself to look up into her eyes, and she was smiling. But he knew it wasn't a cruel or a mocking smile. Something different was happening, and something strange happened. A moment unlike anything he'd ever experienced. He saw in her eyes a light, and it might have just been the reflection from the window, but it was more. It was the light, the same light that was in the sun and the stars was in her eyes. And stranger still, she was crying. And the tears that were coming down her wrinkled little face, he saw the rain and the oceans. And in that warm smile she had on her face, he saw the unconditional love that he had been looking for his entire life. And in that moment, he knew she was the one. And then something really strange happened, a miracle, a mystical moment where he was taken out of his body and he was seeing himself through the eyes of the wise elder. And he saw himself crying and in pain and looking at his own face. In his eyes, he saw the same light that is in the sun and the stars. And in his tears, he saw the rain and the oceans. And there at the corners of his mouth, he saw the beginnings of a smile. And in that smile was the unconditional love he had sought his entire life. He closed his eyes. He came back to his body. He bowed in deep reverence. And he got up and went back to his room. And for many hours, he contemplated the truth that had been delivered to him, that yes, the wise elder is the one, and yes, I am the one. And every blade of grass and every leaf on the giant oak and every member of this community and every visitor, they are the one because there is only one. And he began to live into this truth in the service, and in the singing, and in the stillness. And day after day, and week after week, month after month, and year after year, he never had the urge to go back and ask the wise elder any more questions, but he didn't avoid her. Whenever he saw her, he met her eye, and he received the gift of her love, and he returned it in full measure. The day finally came that the wise elder laid down her body and her spirit returned to truly be one with the one. And the council, the helpers, they gathered to choose a new wise elder, and the conversation was brief and the decision was unanimous. And Anthony, who by himself was an old man, he went to the kitchen and he found Daniel cutting up some carrots. And he said, "Daniel, will you be our wise elder?" And humbly, Daniel put down the knife and wiped his hands on the towel. He said, "It is my honor to serve the one." I have no more words. I love you. God bless you. Thank you for watching this message today. I'd like to invite you to join us in person here on campus at Unity of Houston for Sunday morning or Wednesday evening services. If you can't be with us here on our campus, you can still join us live on Facebook or on our website, unityhouston.org, Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. Central.